His face was a portrait of crumbling pride. From my place on the stage I could see every detail, the way his smug smile froze, then collapsed into disbelief. The crisp, formal voice of the adjutant echoed through the auditorium, each word a hammer blow against the story he'd told for years. By order of the President of the United States, is promoted to the rank of Brigadier General. He flinched. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but I saw it. After a lifetime of being invisible, I finally saw him see me. And in that moment, all I felt was a cold, quiet calm. The storm had finally broken. That storm had been brewing for months, but the final thunderclap came at a local VFW hall. It was 2 months before the ceremony. On a rare weekend of leave, I decided to spend trying to maintain the family peace. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and old memories, a place where men went to relive the only part of their lives they felt truly mattered. I was just trying to get through the dinner, to nod and smile and be the dutiful daughter for 48 hours before returning to my real life. A life none of them could even begin to comprehend. My father, Colonel Rhett Robert Jensen, was a man whose identity was welded to his past military glory. He moved through the world as if he were still commanding a battalion, expecting deference and respect that his civilian life no longer afforded him. He gathered his usual circle of old cronies, his voice rising just enough to carry across the room to where I was sitting. He had always been a performer, and tonight, I was his tragic subject. He leaned in, a conspiratorial whisper that was meant to be overheard. "It's a shame about Catherine," he began, his tone dripping with a carefully rehearsed pity. He let the words hang in the air before delivering the killing blow. She had potential, but the bottle got her. A dishonorable discharge. They kicked her out for drinking. He shook his head slowly, basking in the sympathetic murmurs from his audience. They looked at him with such sorrow, this poor man, burdened with a failed daughter, and I just sat there, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth, the noise of the hall fading into a dull roar. A familiar coldness settled deep in my stomach, the heavy, tired weight of a truth being confirmed yet again. This wasn't just another dinner table jab about my boring desk job or a forgotten birthday. This was different. This was a lie he told to strangers, a slander that attacked my career, my honor, my entire life's work, all to make his own story a little more tragic, a little more heroic. It was a violation of the very code he claimed to hold sacred. He told the story with a theatrical sigh, and his friends shook their heads in sympathy for him. He had no idea he was slandering a field-grade officer in a room full of veterans, who understood the uniform code of military justice better than he remembered. To understand why his lie was not just a family drama, but a strategic miscalculation, you have to understand the 2 wars I was fighting. The 2 wars. One was fought in classified locations against enemies of the state. The other was fought in my own childhood living room against the hero of my youth, my father. To him, my 20 years of service were a phantom, an abstraction he couldn't brag about at the golf course. My highly classified work in signals intelligence was reduced to a dismissive wave of his hand. "She has a little government hobby," he'd tell people, "spends her time playing with computers in a basement somewhere." The condescension was a constant, dull ache I had learned to live with. At every holiday dinner, every family gathering, the script was the same. I would sit silently while my father held court, recounting tales of his own service, each telling more glorious than the last. My mother, Eleanor Jensen, a woman whose lifelong mission was to smooth over any conflict, would shoot me warning glances from across the table. Her eyes pleaded with me, a silent mantra of, "Don't upset your father." Her peacekeeping felt less like love and more like managing a volatile asset. When I was younger, I tried to share small unclassified victories. My promotion to captain, a commendation for a training program I developed. Each one was met with a polite, empty nod before the conversation was steered back to something more tangible. That tangible world belonged to my younger brother, David. He was a mid-level marketing manager for a soda company, and in my father's eyes, he was the real success story. I remember one Christmas he was celebrated for an entire evening because his team had increased regional sales by 4%. My father clapped him on the back, beaming with pride over his son's stable, sensible career. That same week, a project I had led for months had resulted in the successful extraction of a compromised agent from hostile territory. I couldn't say a word about it, of course. So I just sat there, swirling the wine in my glass, adding David's 4% to a long mental tally. It sat right next to the college tuition they covered for him but not for me, and the down payment. For his house, that was a gift, while I was told to learn the value of earning my own way. My other world, my real world, was a universe away from that suffocating praise and calculated silence. It existed in sterile, windowless rooms where the only light came from glowing monitors, and the only sound was the hum of servers and the quiet murmur of analysts. Here I wasn't Katherine Jensen, the disappointing daughter. I was Oracle, and Oracle was a name spoken with respect. My currency wasn't sales percentages, it was actionable intelligence. My victories weren't celebrated with toasts, they were marked by the silent relief of a mission completed, of lives saved. I remember one night in particular, staring at a cascade of raw data streaming across my screen. It was noise mostly. Millions of digital conversations, meaningless chatter. But deep inside, buried under layers of encryption, I caught a whisper. A single data packet, routed through a proxy server in a way that just felt wrong. It was a ghost, a digital fingerprint that shouldn't have been there. While my team saw it as an anomaly, a glitch in the system, my instinct screamed that it was a precursor. It was the digital equivalent of a platoon staging in the woods before an ambush. "Flag the intercept," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of the operations vault. "I want a full trace route and cross-reference all known chatter within these coordinates for the last 72 hours. Tell me who is talking, and more importantly, who just went silent." For the next hour, the tension was a physical presence in the room. We were chasing a shadow, and the clock was ticking. The data pointed to a planned attack on a diplomatic convoy, timed to the minute. My analysis suggested the enemy was using a ghost frequency to coordinate, one we weren't supposed to know existed. It was a gut feeling, a decision based on patterns I couldn't fully explain but knew were there. I had to make the call, divert the convoy based on a whisper. My commanding officer, Colonel Marcus Thorne, was a seasoned, no-nonsense leader who trusted instincts as much as he trusted facts. He was a man carved from granite and experience, who judged people not by their stories, but by their results. He listened to my briefing without interruption, his eyes fixed on the data map. He didn't question me, didn't ask for a committee to weigh in. He just looked at me, saw the certainty in my eyes, and gave a single sharp nod. "Make the call, Oracle." The convoy was rerouted with less than 10 minutes to spare. We later confirmed the original route had been heavily mined. Colonel Thorne never said much afterward. He didn't need to. The next day, he simply placed a copy of my after-action report on my desk, with 2 words written in the margin: "Well done." That quiet acknowledgement from him was worth more than 1,000 empty praises from my father. Colonel Thorne was the one who saw my potential not as a story to be told, but as a weapon to be honed. He was the one who personally submitted my name to the promotion board, arguing that the Army needed my strategic mind at a higher echelon. In his world, my competence was my legacy. My father saw me as a failed version of himself. My command saw me as the variable that guaranteed mission success. For 20 years, I kept those worlds separate, but his lie had breached the firewall. He only respected the chain of command, so I decided to let the chain of command speak for me. After my father's performance at the VFW hall, something inside me finally clicked into place. For years I had tried to fight my war on his terms, with quiet pleas for understanding, with carefully presented facts, with a daughter's desperate hope for acknowledgement. Every attempt had failed, dissolving against the wall of his narrative. I saw a lifetime of those failures flash in my mind, every dismissed achievement, every ignored letter, every condescending pat on the head. Another emotional confrontation would be pointless. It would be another battle on his home turf. So I decided to change the battlefield. The official email arrived on a Tuesday morning, its subject line clinical, and direct notification of selection for promotion to Brigadier General. I read it once, then twice. It wasn't just a career milestone, it was ammunition. It was an opportunity. The anger that had been simmering in my gut for months cooled, hardening into something else, a cold, clear, and precise strategy. My objective was no longer to win his love or respect. The objective was simply a public, procedural correction of the record. The ceremony would be my theater of operations. My father understood one thing above all else: the power of the institution. He revered the uniform, the ceremony, the rigid hierarchy of military life. So I would use the institution itself as my weapon. I sat at my desk, but I wasn't Colonel Jensen, the daughter. I was Oracle, the intelligence officer, planning a mission. My target was my father's ego. My method of delivery would be the U.S. Army's own protocol. I logged into the base system and began drafting the official invitation, the keystrokes deliberate and steady. It was addressed to Colonel Rhett Robert Jensen and Mrs. Jensen, and I made sure to list them as distinguished family guests. I knew that title would be an irresistible lure, a chance for him to stand in the spotlight of a world he missed so desperately. The final piece of the plan required a quiet, tactical move. I scheduled a brief meeting with Colonel Thorne's aide, a sharp young captain who ran the command group like a Swiss watch. I didn't mention my family. I didn't betray a hint of emotion. I simply presented it as a matter of tradition. "Captain," I said, my voice even and professional, "for my promotion ceremony, I'd like to formally request that the full unclassified summary of service be read aloud with the orders." He simply nodded, making a note on his tablet. "Of course, ma'am. For the record, I'll make sure the adjutant has the complete citation." The trap was now armed, not with anger or resentment, but with procedure. He accepted the invitation with pompous pride, assuming it was my desperate attempt to finally gain his approval. He had no idea he wasn't the guest of honor. He was the primary target of an information operation. The day of the ceremony, the air inside the base auditorium was so thick with tradition you could taste it. It was a sea of dress blue uniforms, sharp creases, and polished brass, a world of absolute order and unwavering protocol. This was my sanctuary. This was my truth. I sat in the front row, a place of honor, and watched as an usher escorted my parents to their seats directly across the aisle. My mother, Eleanor, looked like a frightened bird, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. But my father was in his element. He straightened his retired colonel's uniform, puffed out his chest, and gave a knowing nod to a nearby major general as if they were old friends. He believed he was there to be honored, to be seen. He had no idea he was the guest of honor at his own dismantling. The ceremony began with the crisp, flawless movements of the color guard. We all rose for the national anthem, and I felt that familiar sense of purpose settle over me, a quiet strength that had carried me through the darkest nights of my career. It was a stark contrast to the nervous energy radiating from my mother and the smug entitlement rolling off my father. He thought all of this, the pomp, the circumstance, the respect, was a reflection of him, of the legacy he had built. He was about to learn that a legacy isn't an inheritance. It's a burden you earn the right to carry. Colonel Thorne took the stage, and the room fell silent. He didn't speak in the booming, self-aggrandizing tones my father used to tell his war stories. He spoke quietly, with a profound gravity, about the nature of modern service, about the silent, unseen battles fought in the shadows. He spoke of sacrifice, of fidelity, of a commitment to something larger than oneself. Every word was a quiet indictment of the petty lies my father had been peddling for years. Then, Colonel Thorne nodded to the lectern. "The adjutant will now read the orders." An officer, his back ramrod straight, stepped forward. The air in the room grew tight. This was it. The adjutant's voice was a clear, formal monotone, designed to convey information without emotion. "The President of the United States," he began, "has reposed special trust and confidence in the patriotism, valor, fidelity, and abilities of Colonel Katherine Jensen." I risked a glance at my father. A slow, deeply satisfied smile was spreading across his face. He nudged my mother, a silent, "I told you so." He was beaming, absorbing the reflected glory, believing this was the absolute peak of my achievement, a fine accomplishment for his daughter. He thought the story was over. He was wrong. The adjutant took a steadying breath, his voice never wavering as he continued on to the next page. Her distinguished service includes 7 overseas campaigns. A low murmur rippled through the audience. 7. It was an astonishing number. I saw my father's smile falter, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. The adjutant continued, each phrase a perfectly placed shot. Recipient of the Bronze Star Medal with Valor Device. The memory of him calling my career a little hobby flashed in my mind, sharp and bitter. The audience was now dead silent, hanging on every word. And 3 Purple Hearts. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, a choked gasp. My father's face had gone from smug to confused to utterly blank with shock. The adjutant's voice rose with an almost imperceptible increase in authority. For her extraordinary contributions to national security in Operation Desert Serpent and Operation Silent Shield. These were names my father had only heard whispered on the news, classified operations spoken of with a mixture of awe and fear. And then came the final, devastating blow. The adjutant looked up from the page, making eye contact with the commanding general. She is hereby appointed to the office of Brigadier General in the United States Army. The words echoed in the profound silence. My name was called. I stood, my legs steady, and walked toward the stage. My eyes never left my father. His face was ashen, the color drained from it, his mouth slightly agape. As Colonel Thorne and my husband unpinned the eagle from my shoulders to be replaced, with a single brilliant silver star, I saw the movement across the aisle. My father lurched to his feet. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a lifetime of training, an instinct buried in his bones. He was a retired colonel, and a general officer had just been announced in his presence. His body, betraying his shattered mind, snapped into a rigid, trembling version of attention. For my entire life, he'd been the colonel, and I was just his daughter. In that auditorium, under the weight of 7 campaigns and 3 Purple Hearts, he was just a retiree, and I was his general. At the reception that followed, the new reality settled in with breathtaking speed. My parents stood awkwardly near the entrance, 2 ghosts in a room crackling with life. They had become invisible. For decades, my father had been the center of every room he entered, a gravitational force of charisma and authority. Now, he was just an old man in a slightly too large uniform, and my mother was his silent, anxious shadow. One by one, young lieutenants, seasoned colonels, and grizzled sergeants major walked right past them, their eyes fixed on me. They would approach, snap to attention, and offer a crisp salute. Congratulations, General Jensen. Each salute felt like a small act of correction. Each handshake was a confirmation of a truth he had tried so hard to deny. I was surrounded by my real family, the one forged in the crucible of service. A brotherhood and sisterhood bound by a shared code of honor. They were the ones who had seen my work, who had trusted my judgment in moments when lives were on the line. They had known my worth all along. I looked over at one point, intending to, I don't know what, offer a hollow olive branch, but they were gone. They hadn't said goodbye. They had simply slipped out of the event, erased by a truth they could no longer control. And the honest-to-God feeling that washed over me wasn't loss. It was peace. 6 months later, that peace had solidified into a new foundation for my life. I stood at the head of a polished mahogany table in a secure conference room deep within the Pentagon. The air was cool and smelled of ozone and coffee. On the screens behind me were global threat assessments and satellite data. Streams, a complex tapestry of the very world I was tasked to protect. The room was filled with other generals and senior civilian analysts, people whose collective decisions could shift the course of history, and I was briefing them. My voice was calm and steady, resonant with an authority that was now second nature. There was no hesitation, no need to prove I belonged. The single star on my shoulder was my ticket, but the words I spoke were the currency that mattered here. I was no longer Oracle, the shadowy intelligence officer. I was General Katherine Jensen, and my analysis was shaping strategic policy. This was the world I had fought for, not just on distant battlefields, but in the quiet, lonely war against my own family's perception. Here, in the heart of the nation's defense, My intellect wasn't a hobby. It was a vital national asset. The aftershocks of the ceremony had reconfigured my personal world as well. The most surprising change came from my brother David. He called me a few days after the event, his voice tentative and strange. "Kate?" he'd said, like he was speaking to a stranger. I had no idea. For the first time in our lives, he asked me what I actually did. It was an awkward, stumbling conversation, but it was the most honest one we'd ever had. Now, we have a call scheduled every Sunday. He asks about my work, the parts I can talk about anyway, and he actually listens. We are slowly, cautiously, building a new relationship, one based, not on the old family script, but on a shared, acknowledged truth. About a month ago, a letter arrived at my office. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope, and I recognized my father's rigid, formal handwriting immediately. My hands were perfectly steady as I opened it. For 10 pages, he wrote about his own service, about the values he had tried to instill in me, about his pride in seeing the Jensen name continue in military leadership. It was a masterclass in narrative reclamation, a clumsy attempt to weld his legacy to my success. He never once mentioned the lies. He never once apologized. He just tried to rewrite the story with him as the wise, guiding patriarch. I read the whole thing, and a faint echo of the old, familiar hurt pricked at my heart. But that's all it was, an echo. It had no power anymore. He was a ghost, writing from a past that no longer existed. A quiet sense of closure settled over me. He would never understand, and that was okay. I no longer needed him to. I folded the letter, slid it into a folder, and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't need to reply. I had soldiers to lead, missions to plan, and a future to command. My father believed a legacy was something you inherit. I learned a true legacy is something you build in silence and have acknowledged in public. If you've ever had to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it, share your story below. In this community, your expertise is always recognized.